There's a whole generation of people who clearly remember rotary phones and also the first iPhone launch, and psychologists still aren't completely sure where to categorize them. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, you land at the very end of Gen X, yet you don't fully feel like a millennial either, even though people keep trying to squeeze you into one of those labels. Researchers began referring to you as a Xennial around 2014. Some sociologists even describe this group as a microgeneration because the time frame is so narrow. What happened during that brief stretch of history created something that is genuinely worth looking at more closely. So today we're going to examine what makes this group fascinating from a psychological point of view. From the beginning, you spent your early years in a fully analog world where boredom was something you simply endured, where you actually memorized phone numbers instead of saving them. And if you missed your favorite TV show, that was it. It was gone. Then suddenly, just as you were stepping into adulthood, the entire world shifted into digital mode. Not slowly, not step by step, almost overnight. The timing of that transformation carried consequences that are still unfolding today. Most generations grow up completely inside one technological era or another. Xennials, however, experience both of these defining environments during the years when identity is still forming. Your late teenage years looked nothing like your 20s, and the gap between those experiences was wider than what most generations go through. Think about what that meant for everyday life. So much of your teens involved passing handwritten notes in class, having conversations that simply disappeared once they ended, or making plans without the ability to text running late or where are you? You just showed up and hoped your friends would be there. That required a different level of trust and reliability than what we see today. Then you entered your 20s and watched everyone get cell phones. You signed up for Friendster, then MySpace, and later, Facebook. Before social media, most people had only a few ways to reach someone: their home phone, their work number, or by physically going to their house. Then all at once, there were endless messaging platforms, and you adapted without much hesitation. During your formative period, you moved through both worlds. Research on brain development shows that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for adapting to new situations and mastering complex skills, continues maturing until about age 25. Studies published in scientific journals have shown that this region develops well into the 20s. That means Xennials were still inside this high plasticity phase when the technological landscape changed dramatically. You were young enough that learning new tools felt intuitive, yet old enough to clearly remember what life was like before them. Gen X, being adults when most of this technology emerged, can sometimes approach it with caution or skepticism. Younger millennials often have little memory of life before the internet became central. But Xennials experienced both realities, creating a kind of dual fluency that is uncommon. You can engage in a face-to-face conversation without constantly checking your phone, yet you also feel comfortable navigating new apps and software. You remember what it felt like to be truly unreachable for hours, something many younger people have never experienced. At the same time, you're not overwhelmed by technology the way some older adults can be. This dual exposure influences subtle parts of your personality. For instance, you may have a different relationship with privacy. You grew up at a time when embarrassing moments simply faded with time instead of living forever online. That awkward haircut in 7th grade, that breakup, that reckless party night, there's likely no permanent digital record. Those events survive only in stories. That creates a fundamentally different connection to your past. Your memories could shift, soften, or reshape themselves over time as human memory naturally does. You weren't confined by permanent documentation. Psychological research on autobiographical memory suggests that our recollections are flexible. The brain edits experiences, keeps what feels important, and lets the rest gradually disappear. When everything becomes recorded and searchable, that natural editing process becomes more complicated in ways we are still trying to understand. But there is another layer that often goes unnoticed. Many Xennials stepped into the workforce around the time of the 2008 financial crisis. Entering adulthood during such economic instability had a deep impact. Research on financial stress shows that hardship during early career years can leave long-lasting psychological marks. People who experience layoffs, unstable income, or uncertainty during this stage often carry that sense of insecurity forward, even when their situation improves. It shapes attitudes toward money, safety, and risk in ways that don't easily fade. So you have a group that learned to handle massive technological shifts while also being economically shaken right as stability was supposed to form. You know how to adjust because you had no choice. But there may also be a quiet background thought that asks, what if everything collapses again? That combination rarely gets discussed. Public conversations about generations often simplify everything into Gen X versus Millennials, as if everyone born between certain decades shares the exact same experiences. But specific birth years, especially during periods of rapid change, create unique psychological patterns that don't neatly match broad labels. Xennials carry a paradox that is fairly uncommon. You inherited some of the independence and skepticism associated with Gen X because you grew up before constant parental monitoring became widespread. Your parents often didn't know your location for hours, and that was normal. You figured things out alone. You learned how to manage boredom and frustration without immediate adult intervention. At the same time, you became adults during the early internet era, when technology was widely believed to unite people and solve major problems, before we recognized that it could also complicate life. It's a strange place to stand. Independent yet collaborative, cautious yet hopeful, comfortable in digital spaces but rooted in analog memories. What seems to define Xennials most clearly is the capacity to hold contradictions without discomfort. You remember the before and the after, so you can see both the benefits and the losses. You may not feel as intensely nostalgic as some older Gen X members because you genuinely appreciate modern convenience. But unlike many younger individuals, you also understand what disappeared along the way. You lost the ability to be effortlessly alone with your thoughts. You lost the patience built through waiting. You lost a certain depth of presence that existed when fewer things competed for attention. Yet you gained instant connection, vast information, and opportunities your childhood self could hardly imagine. If you identify as a Xennial, you might often feel slightly out of place. Too young for some references and too old for others. Positioned between two realities. That is not a flaw. It may actually be the central feature of your generational story. In a world that evolves faster than anyone can forecast, having already lived through one enormous transition might be one of the most valuable lessons you possess. You adapted to a transitional existence. The environment you were raised in does not have to be the same one you remain in forever. That adaptability may be the true significance of the Xennial experience. Not because it makes you superior, but because you lived through a precise historical moment that taught something essential. How to adjust without completely losing your sense of self. If this connected with you, I'd truly appreciate you subscribing. And if you'd like to support the channel so I can continue creating thoughtful content like this, consider becoming a member. Your support genuinely matters. I have more videos lined up that I think you'll relate to. Different subjects, but the same level of depth. I'll see you in the next one.